We use the word myth every day to describe things that aren't true. A debunked diet trend, an urban legend, a popular misconception. Because of that colloquial definition, we tend to look back at the narratives of ancient cultures and dismiss them as primitive fairy tales. We treat them as naive fictions simply because they lack literal, historical accuracy. But to the folklorists and anthropologists who study these texts, that framework gets it backward. Within their disciplines, the factual veracity of a story is entirely irrelevant to determining whether or not it constitutes a myth. In academic terms, a myth is a sacred, foundational narrative. These stories, which usually involve non-human characters or supernatural events, operate as the internal operating instructions for a society, establishing its core values, customs, and taboos. To understand human nature, we have to stop asking if these stories actually happened and start asking what they actually do. Tracking how scholars have interpreted these narratives over the centuries reveals the ongoing attempt to decode our own behavioral programming. The drive to rationalize these stories is exceptionally old. In ancient Greece, a thinker named Euhemerus promoted a theory that myths were simply real historical events that had been distorted over generations of retellings. Under this logic, a myth about a powerful wind god might trace its origins back to a real mortal king who happened to teach his people how to use sails. Over centuries of telephone, the sailor becomes a deity. By the 19th century, Western scholars faced a different problem. Global colonialism brought an influx of complex oral and written traditions from the Americas, Africa, and ancient Eurasia. To make sense of this volume, Victorian intellectuals developed nature mythology. They argued that early humans invented animistic gods to explain physical phenomena like the weather or agricultural fertility, because they lacked the capacity to understand impersonal scientific laws. By categorizing these narratives as failed science experiments, the 19th century ignored their utility. To figure out what these stories actually achieved, the next generation of thinkers had to stop looking out at the natural world and start looking inward. In the early 20th century, the academic focus shifted. Scholars began treating global folklore as a map of the human mind, reflecting internal psychological realities rather than external natural laws. Drawing heavily on classical texts like the Oedipus story, Sigmund Freud framed myths as the external expression of deep subconscious desires and repressed psychological urges. Carl Jung expanded on this approach. He noticed that specific themes and character types appeared consistently across entirely disconnected cultures, arguing that this proved all humans share a set of innate, universal psychological archetypes. While psychologists analyzed the individual mind, mid-century anthropologists examined the community. They determined that myths operate as functional structures holding complex populations together. They provide what is called a mythic charter. By grounding a society's origins in a sacred, primordial past, these stories legitimize current power dynamics, enforce strict behavioral taboos, and mandate specific rituals. Over just a few decades, academia stopped treating myth as an obsolete curiosity. It became clear that these narratives are a functional social technology, engineered to keep a society from collapsing. Recent postmodern scholarship has moved away from the idea of a single perfect text. Researchers now argue that there is no such thing as an original or pure version of any myth. Instead, contemporary analysts break these narratives down into hylemes, the smallest fundamental plot components and narrative materials that make up a story. Looking at myths as a collection of hylemes reveals how plastic they are. The components can be combined, rearranged, and adapted to fit a new artistic medium or address whatever specific cultural anxiety exists at the time. Because they are modular, these stories don't fade away as a society progresses. They survive by shedding their outer shape and adopting a new one. It is easy to assume that rapid secularization and modern technology have cured us of our need for myth. But the psychological and sociological requirements haven't vanished. We just moved the delivery mechanism from religious rituals to mass media and popular culture. Modern entertainment corporations actively harness the same narrative structures, like the culture hero or the creation epic,
to build lucrative cinematic universes and shape childhood norms. Meanwhile, millions of people online engage in hyper-serial fanfiction. Scholars point out that fans are organically reclaiming these corporate stories, tweaking the narrative hylemes to critique real-world power dynamics and to build universal story worlds of their own. A digital community collaboratively editing a fictional universe is executing the same impulse as an ancient society sharing oral traditions around a campfire. We are collectively shaping our reality through shared narrative. A myth is not a lie. As mythologist Dev.Patanayak puts it, a myth is somebody's truth. It is the underlying code of human culture, proving that no matter how much our technology advances, our need for these stories remains absolute.